A church volunteer in southwest Houston is charged with running a stash house network that moved people north from the Rio Grande Valley for 7 years. The indictment lists 11 counts. Prosecutors put the number of people held inside one 3-bedroom house at more than 1,900. He had coordinated the parish food pantry for 19 years. He held the credential to drive the 15-passenger van with the parish decal on the sliding door. The criminal complaint says ransom calls to families in Honduras and Guatemala were placed from a landline at an address the parish had listed in its own printed bulletin as an outreach location. Federal agents had probable cause to arrest him in October 2023. They waited another 11 months. By the end of this, you will know what Homeland Security investigations recorded across 232 days from a poll camera on Kellwood Lane. You will know what the composition notebook in the pantry storage room contained, and why the government took the unusual step of holding 8 foreign nationals in federal custody as material witnesses to convict one man. And you will know who actually broke the case. No agent, no wiretap, no informant on a payroll. A 19-year-old who drove that van on Saturdays and walked into the HSI field office on his own, without a lawyer, in June of 2024. Start with the man on the indictment. Ramiro Cuellar Aguirre, 58 years old at the time of arrest. Born in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Naturalized as a United States citizen in 2003. Licensed HVAC service technician employed by the same commercial refrigeration contractor in Stafford, Texas, for 16 years. Reported income in the year federal agents began watching him, $52,000. He began volunteering at a southwest Houston parish in 2005. Court filings never named the church. They call it Parish A. Over 19 years, he coordinated the Thursday food distribution, helped run the adult English classes on Tuesday nights, and became one of 4 people on the parish insurance policy cleared to operate the van. In March 2016, a residence in the 9200 block of Kellwood Lane sold for $141,000, cash. No mortgage, no lien, no financing contingency. The buyer of record was a Texas limited liability company registered 11 days before closing with a registered agent address that was a mailbox store on Beechnut Street. A man earning $52,000 a year does not buy a second house for cash. Prosecutors would spend 3 years proving he did not have to. The house paid for itself in 7-day increments at between $3,500 and $8,000 per person held inside it. Nothing about the property drew attention. Harris County records show no code violations. Houston Police Department records show no calls for service to that address between 2016 and 2023. Not one. 7 years, one of the largest police departments in the country, and a residence that generated fewer complaints than the houses on either side of it. That silence is the case. Everything that follows exists because of one traffic stop 240 miles away. On September 3, 2021, a white Chevrolet Express cargo van entered the Border Patrol checkpoint on U.S. Highway 281 near Falfurrias in Brooks County, Texas. The Falfurrias checkpoint sits roughly 70 miles north of the border. It exists because the border is the first line, not the last one. A canine alerted on the rear cargo area. Agents opened it and found 11 people seated on the floor. No seats had been installed. The driver was Edgar Nolasco Rincon, 27, a Mexican national with no prior criminal history in the United States. Standard case: transport charge, plea, sentence, removal. It should have ended there. It did not, because agents obtained a warrant for the contents of the driver's phone. The extraction returned a dropped map pin, shared into a group message 43 separate times across 5 months. The pin resolved to the 9,200 block of Kellwood Lane, southwest Houston. Not a warehouse, not an industrial bay. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a basketball hoop over the garage. The referral moved to HSI Houston in early 2022 and sat in a queue for 11 months. That is not a scandal. That is arithmetic. HSI. Houston covers one of the highest volume human smuggling corridors in the country, and a single address with no arrests attached to it does not outrank an active kidnapping. What moved it up the queue was a second van, a second checkpoint, and the same pin. In November 2022, Border Patrol agents at the Sarita checkpoint on US 77 stopped a second vehicle. Different driver, different organization on paper, same GPS coordinates in the phone. 2 independent transport cells, 200 miles apart, both terminating at the same suburban address. HSI. Special Agent Danielle Ray opened a full field investigation in December 2022 and requested authorization for fixed-position video surveillance. On February 14, 2023, a camera went up on a utility pole across the street from the residence. It stayed there for 232 days. A question comes up in every one of these cases. How is that legal without a warrant? Agents did not seek one. The government's position, argued and won at the suppression stage, is that a camera on a public utility pole records only what any person standing on that street could see. Defense counsel challenged it directly. The court cited the Seventh Circuit's 2021 decision in United States v. Tuggle, which upheld 18 months of pole camera surveillance of a defendant's home, and the First Circuit's divided en banc ruling in United States v. Moore-Bush. The court denied the motion to suppress in full. So, the footage came in, roughly 5,600 hours of it. Here is what the government's summary exhibit established. 63 separate arrivals between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. Vehicles backing to the garage rather than parking at the curb. The garage door closing before any door on the vehicle opened. Windows on the north side of the house covered from the inside with foil and cardboard in a climate where the July heat index runs past 105. And trash. 14 bags a week, set out by a household with 2 people on the utility account. One vehicle on that footage did not fit the pattern, and it will matter later. A silver Nissan Sentra arriving in daylight, almost always on Saturday mornings, almost always for under 20 minutes. The driver was a young man. He never went in through the garage. He went in through the front door, and he always knocked. Agents flagged him as a subject of interest in March 2023. They would not learn who he was for another 15 months. Then the analysts went to the money, and the money went to the church. Financial investigators pulled records from 3 accounts. Across 26 months, they documented 88 cash deposits, each one between $2,900 and $9,400, totaling just over $600,000. Every deposit sat under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. The government charged that pattern as structuring, and the money laundering conspiracy count under Title 18, Section 1956 rests on it. $600,000 from a man whose W-2 said 52. But the piece that changed the character of the case was not a bank record. It was a toll record. The Harris County Toll Road Authority retains EZ-tag transponder data. Every gantry, every timestamp, every plate. Analysts requested records for vehicles associated with the network. One of the transponders came back registered not to Cuellar Aguirre, and not to the LLC, but to the parish. 47 transits of the Sam Houston Tollway between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. The 15-passenger van, the one with the decal. Investigators cross-referenced each toll timestamp against the poll camera. The government's trial exhibit says 31 of those 47 overnight transits ended with the same van backing into the garage on Kelwood Lane within 40 minutes. Think about the logistics of that for a moment. A vehicle insured by a religious nonprofit, driven by a man authorized to drive it, on a route the organization never asked about, at an hour nobody was awake to see. The most valuable asset in this organization was not a stash house. It was an institution that had no procedure for asking a question. That sounds like an accusation against the parish. It isn't. There was no procedure to ask because no functioning church in America has one. The entire operating model of a volunteer organization is that you trust the person who shows up for 19 years. The network did not defeat the parish's safeguards. It used the absence of any as infrastructure. By October 2023, HSI had the vehicles, the deposits, the tolls, and 232 days of video. Agents drafted a complaint affidavit. Supervisors reviewed it. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Texas had enough to charge. They did not charge. The poll camera came down on October 4, 2023, and the surveillance shifted to methods the defense would not learn about until discovery. Hold that. It is the whole reason this case ended the way it did. A stash house prosecution is not built on cameras. It is built on the people who were inside, and the government did not have a single one of them. That changed on January 30, 2024. Houston police and HSI executed a warrant at a second residence in the Gulfton area, connected to the same organization. 14 people were encountered inside. Under normal circumstances, most would be processed for removal within days. Instead, prosecutors filed applications under Title 18, United States Code, Section 3144, the Federal Material Witness Statute. It permits detaining a person whose testimony is material to a criminal proceeding when it may become impracticable to secure their presence by subpoena. For a person subject to removal, that is not a hypothetical. It is a certainty. A magistrate judge signed 8 of those applications. 8 people who had already been held against their will were then held again in federal custody by the government that found them. Their attorneys said so on the record. The court's written order acknowledged it directly and found the testimony material anyway. That is the part the press release did not lead with. What those 8 described, in sworn depositions taken under Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 15, forms the factual core of the indictment. Stays of 6 to 19 days, phones surrendered on arrival, mattresses on the floor of a converted garage, a smuggling fee of roughly $11,000 paid before departure. Then, after arrival in Houston, a second demand of $3,500 to $8,000 made by phone to relatives in the United States and Central America, with the family member on the line. The filings state that the phone was held on speaker during those calls. The court documents do not go further, and neither will this. 4 of the 8 identified Cuellar Aguirre from a photo array. Their descriptions were consistent on one point that prosecutors used in opening statements. He was not the man who guarded the door. He was the man who arrived in the afternoon, brought food from a plastic crate, and asked whether anyone needed medicine. The government's theory was never that he was the enforcer. It was that he was the reason the house looked normal. The takedown came on September 12, 2024. Approximately 60 federal and state personnel staged before dawn. HSI Houston Special Agents, an HSI Special Response Team element, Houston Police Department Major Offenders Investigators, and Texas Department of Public Safety Troopers for Perimeter and Traffic Control. 4 locations. Simultaneous execution at 5:58 a.m. At the Kelwood Lane residence, agents recovered 9 cellular phones, 2 ledgers, $21,400 in cash in a kitchen cabinet, and a single firearm. 6 people were inside. 4 had arrived within the previous 72 hours. Cuellar Aguirre was not there. He was at work, and then he was where he was every Thursday. Agents arrested him at 7:20 a.m. at the Parish Hall loading dock during the setup for the weekly food distribution. Court filings note that approximately 40 people were already queued at the doors. He was handcuffed in front of the pantry he had run for 19 years, beside a crate of the same donated groceries the material witnesses described being fed. He was arraigned that afternoon in Houston Federal Court. Case number 4:24-CR-00317. The indictment charged conspiracy to harbor and transport aliens under Title 8, Section 1324A1A51, harboring for the purpose of commercial advantage and private financial gain under 1324A1A3 and A1B1, transporting under A1A2, and conspiracy to commit money laundering under Title 18, Section 1956H. 11 counts. The government moved for detention. The magistrate granted it, citing the resources of the organization and the number of witnesses subject to removal. The search of the parish pantry storage room, conducted under a separate warrant, recovered one further item: a composition notebook, the kind sold in packs for school supply drives, wedged behind boxes of canned goods. It contained handwritten entries in columns: a first name or a nickname, a date in, a date out, a number. 1,907 lines. Prosecutors did not claim every line represented a person held on Kelwood Lane, and the defense contested the count vigorously at trial. But the notebook's earliest dated entry was April 2017, 1 year after the house was purchased in cash. Its last entry was 8 days before the arrest. Now, the 11 months. The defense built its case around that delay. If the government had probable cause in October 2023, why did the house keep running until September 2024? The cross-examination was direct. How many people passed through that residence during the period when federal agents have the evidence to stop it and chose not to? The answer from the discovery is 2 things. The first is that Kelwood Lane was not the objective. HSI had obtained authorization on January 19, 2024, for interception of wire communications on a coordinator operating out of the Rio Grande Valley, the supply end of the pipeline. Those intercepts, combined with cell site data, allowed investigators to map 9 residences across the Houston metropolitan area receiving from the same source. Arresting the church volunteer in October 2023 would have burned the wire and left 8 houses running. Agents made a judgment: take the network, not the node. The second reason is the silver Nissan Sentra. In June 2024, a 19-year-old walked into the HSI field office in North Houston and asked to speak to someone about a house. He had no lawyer. He had not been approached, subpoenaed, or identified. He came in because of something he had noticed and could not stop noticing. He was a youth volunteer at the parish. Since he was 17, he had been driving over on Saturday mornings to drop off pantry paperwork and pick up the van keys. Roughly 20 minutes each visit. Always through the front door, always after knocking. He told agents that in April he had gone to the house on a weekday instead of a Saturday, because a delivery had been rescheduled. The garage door was open. He described what he saw inside, and then he described the thing that brought him in. He recognized one of the people in that garage. She had come through the Thursday food line the previous month. She had walked into a church food distribution in daylight in a city of 2.3 million people and gotten in line with everyone else. He had waved at her. His statement gave prosecutors what 5,600 hours of video could not. A witness who could not be removed from the country, who had no immigration exposure, who had no plea deal, and who had walked in voluntarily. He was never charged. He testified for 2 hours and 11 minutes. The man who had run the food pantry for 19 years was convicted in part by a teenager he had trained to hand out the food. Trial began February 9, 2026, in the Southern District of Texas. It ran 11 days. The jury deliberated for 2. Guilty on 9 of 11 counts. Acquitted on 2 transporting counts tied to dates the government could not place him behind the wheel. On May 8, 2026, the court sentenced him to 264 months in federal prison. 22 years. The sentencing guidelines calculation under Section 2L 1.1 applied enhancements for the number of people involved, for holding them in conditions creating a substantial risk of serious bodily injury, and for the demand of payment beyond the smuggling fee. The court also imposed a forfeiture money judgment of $604,000 and ordered the Kelwood Lane property forfeited under Title 21, Section 853. The house sold at federal auction for $198,000. It is a rental now. The listing describes the converted garage as bonus square footage. His 3 co-defendants pleaded guilty. The house manager received 151 months. The transport driver received 78 months. The Rio Grande Valley coordinator received 188 months and a removal order to be executed at the end of his sentence. Then there is the part the DOJ release did not include. Of the 8 material witnesses held under Section 3144, 5 were removed from the United States before the sentencing hearing. 2 of them had already given sworn testimony against him. The jury watched their Rule 15 depositions on video because by February 2026, they were no longer in the country to appear. The government detained them so their testimony could be secured. It secured the testimony. Then it deported them. Both of those things are lawful. Both of those things happened in the same case file. 19 years of unpaid work at a food pantry do not offset 7 years of ransom calls, and no one should pretend otherwise. But the trust that made the 19 years possible is what made the 7 years invisible. That is not an irony. That was the operating system. The parish is still open. It is still called Parish A in every federal filing, and no one there was charged with anything. The Thursday distribution ran the following week. The diocese removed the residence from its outreach listings within 72 hours of the arrest and revised its volunteer screening policy in January 2025 to require an annual address verification for any property used for parish activity. That policy exists now because of this case. It did not exist for the 1,907 lines in the notebook. The parish bulletins from those years are still archived online. The 2019 edition lists the outreach locations on page 4 under a header thanking volunteers for their service. The 9th line on that page is 9218 Kelwood Lane.